Hello and welcome to Black History Month at Writing on the Wall, the time of year when we shine an additional spotlight on the incredible creative Black talent that we work with all year round at Writing on the Wall. I think it's fair to say that the Black History Month is becoming one of the most popular national celebrations, one of the most important celebrations, both here and internationally, actually. And we're very proud to be part of that. We're very proud of the programme that we're presenting to you this October. And in the spotlight, we have a takeover. We have Blue Saint in the spotlight with our young writers taking over the Tate. And they will be in residence throughout the month. And what's going to happen there is young writers are responding to the fantastic collection of Black art that is in the Tate. We've also got another residency where the amazingly talented Ashley is our writer. Ashley Nugent is our writer on the block. And for those of you who don't know, the block is a digital space dedicated to writing in all of its forms, and you can just join the block through our website. But our special guest tonight, we're delighted to have him with us. In the relatively short period that he's been working with Writing on the Wall, I'd say just over 18 months, he's made such a contribution and brought important thoughts and ideas that we now have given him his own regular spot, and that is called Small Talk. And that is an open invitation for our guest to come and join us whenever he feels he has got something important to say. And that, you know, he has a lot of important things to say. I am talking, of course, about Stephen Small, professor at Berkeley University. You might have seen earlier in the year, to commemorate the 1981 uprisings, Stephen wrote a series of blogs, small talk blogs, which were dedicated to analysing those events. And if you missed them, they're still on the Writing on the Wall website, and they're fantastic and give a great insight into the period and into the politics behind the event. Now, I'm delighted to have Stephen here, but I'm not gonna say any more about Stephen because we have a special host for this evening's event, Janaea Pickett. And Janaea is someone who's worked with Writing on the Wall for quite a long time. She's been involved, first off, she got involved with us through our Great Water Race Riots project. And in fact, she became the public face of that project when she narrated and presented a film, an educational film, and she did a wonderful job. Also on our website, if you'd like to still see that film, she's been involved in the L8 Archive project, and most recently she helped to curate the most dramatic installation on the pierhead with the soundscape Mersey Sound. So she's also a very talented writer and music journalist, and it's lovely to for her to be hosting this conversation and event with Stephen tonight. Now, before I hand you over to Janaea, I'd just like to give you do the Zoom etiquette, really. It's great to have you in the Zoom room with us. It's totally up to you whether you switch your cameras on or not. It's nice to see you, though, if you would like to switch your cameras on. There will be an opportunity for you to ask questions later on in the event. And there's two ways of doing that. You can either use the raised hand function at the bottom of your screen, which is under the little reactions button, or you can simply type your questions into the chat function, and Janaea will pose those questions to Stephen. I should also say that this event will be posted in its entirety on Facebook. So if you're a little bit shy, maybe type your question and leave your camera off. But as I say, if you're not a little bit shy, it would be lovely to see you in the room with us this evening. I think I've gone through all the Zoom housekeeping things. So without further ado, could you give a big virtual welcome to our host for this evening, Janaea Pickett.
Hi, Madeline. That was lovely. Thank you. Yes, so I've been a friend of Writing on the Wall for about 7 years now, as Madeline mentioned, first with the Great Water Race Rights Project. And Writing on the Wall, I think I've always championed the Black community in Liverpool through many projects that capture our heritage here, as well as, you know, through their creative writing initiatives supporting young Black writers and writers of colour. So I'm really proud to be a friend of WOW and delighted to host this event this evening. So, you know, and as a fourth generation Black Scouser, you know, I find it, my experience with WOW in doing the research into the Black community has definitely enriched my life, and I'm sure, you know, others would say the same. So enough about me. Stephen Small was born and raised in Liverpool, but before moving to the US in 1984, he currently lives in Oakland, California. He earned a PhD in sociology at the University of California in 1989. He is professor in the Department of African Diaspora Studies at the University of Berkeley, where he's taught since 1995. He's director of the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues. He researches the history and sociology of Black people across the African diaspora, including the United States, Western Europe, the Caribbean, and Brazil. He's held visiting positions at universities in Great Britain, the Netherlands, France, Spain, Brazil, Japan, and Zimbabwe. He was guest curator at the Atlantic Slave Trade Gallery at the Merseyside Maritime Museum, which became the International Slavery Museum in 2007. His book, 20 Questions and Answers on Black Europe, was published in January 2018, and he is the co-author of Representations of Slavery, Race, Ideology, and Southern Plantation Museums. His next book is entitled Inside the Shadows of the Big House, 21st Century Antebellum Slave Cabins and Heritage Tourism in Louisiana, which will be released next year. And he's currently writing a book on slavery, imperialism, and their legacies in Black Liverpool. And the talk today is mainly going to be about the Black US today, and how that compares and contrasts with the Black experience in the UK. And with that, I'd like to introduce and give a big welcome to Stephen Small.
Okay, thank you very much, Janaea. I hope that you can hear me and see this presentation. I can't see anyone else at the moment, but that's okay. Good evening to everyone. Thank you to co-directors of WOW, Mike Morris and Madeline Hennigan, for the invitation to speak this evening. Thank you to the staff, especially to Janaea and to Zach, and to all the other staff members who've been involved in organizing this event. And a special thanks to Janaea for that introduction. As Janaea pointed out, I was born and raised in Liverpool 8, and my mum and dad had a barbershop and a house at 106 Upper Hill Street. I went to school at Windsor Street. I played five-a-side football in the Rodney. I listened to soul music in the Blackie and reggae music in Stanley House and the Methodist. I went to the uni in England in Kent and Bristol, and I began a PhD at the University of London. But I didn't stay in London. I came to the United States in 1984 to complete my PhD in sociology right here at Berkeley. In fact, I've been in the US for 37 years, and I've actually been more or less in the same building as a student and then as a professor. The building I'm in used to be called Barrows, but its name was recently changed because students mobilized because Barrows was a racist, and the building has been changed to the Social Science Building. I lived in Massachusetts for several years, and I lived in New York for several months. I've also spent several years doing research in Georgia and Louisiana. And I've been teaching at Berkeley, as Janaya said, since 1985. I've lived in Oakland, California since 1998. The first time I met Angela Davis, who also lives in Oakland, was at the Grand Lake Theater, a movie theater in the 1990s is when I met her. And she still lives in Oakland right now. Today, I want to tell you something about the fascinating complexity of Black life across the United States. I'm doing that because of the information, insights, and reflection that it can bring to everyone in general, and to Black people in particular. Because in Liverpool, Black people have always looked to the United States for motivation and encouragement. And I can honestly say it was Black Americans that helped me slow down and reverse the colonized education that I received in Liverpool schools. Now, the United States is a big country. In fact, it's better to say it's massive, enormous, gigantic, and large. So it's probably not a good idea to make generalizations, whether we're talking about Black people or non-Black people. Nevertheless, I'm going to make one generalization, a generalization that I think is probably true, probably certainly true. And it's this, that no matter what you look at in this nation, it's going to be uneven, extreme, and contradictory. Race and racism are pervasive in the United States, and the racists have the resources, but Black people have resistance, resilience, determination, and tenacity. And I want to give you some examples from across the nation. Okay, let me see if this is working. Okay, seems to be working fine. Okay, so politics, policing, and the pandemic. Republicans continue at the present time to perpetrate and disseminate the big lie that the 2020 election of President Biden was based on fraud. They've provided no evidence. They've provided no facts. They've provided what they call alternative facts. And what they're really saying to us is don't believe your lying eyes and ears, even though the facts show it was a genuine election. We're supposed to believe that it was a fraud. Most Black people in the United States today vote for Democrats, but there's a small but significant percentage of Black people who vote for Republicans. Republicans are actively engaged in restricting voting for anyone who votes Democrat, but especially for Blacks and Latinos. They're trying to prevent early registration of voting. They're trying to prevent mail-in voting. And they're trying to prevent organizations like churches bringing people to vote. This is most flagrant in Texas, but it's happening around the country. I'm having some trouble moving the slides. Aha, I see. They're just going slow. Okay. Whoop. Wait a moment. Let me see. Yeah, I'm having a little trouble with this, with these slides. Yeah, I wonder if I could get some help here.
Yeah, sure, Stephen. Sorry, if you could just screen share again. I had to cancel your screen share just because they clashed. So if you just screen share again, it shouldn't be a problem.
Okay. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay, so then, okay, yeah, that looks a lot better. Okay, so I did that. Okay. So in terms of vaccinations and the pandemic, there are highly uneven, extreme, and contradictory patterns. In Massachusetts, 69% of people have been vaccinated. In New York, 65%. California, 60%. At the other extreme, in Alabama, there's 44%. And in West Virginia, 40%. Whites overall have been vaccinated to the level of 54%, and Blacks overall to 46%. So there's still severe hesitation in both groups. And as many of you probably know, Colin Powell just died from complications related to pandemic, to COVID and the coronavirus. Overall, the rates of vaccinations are going up slowly but steadily. Okay. The police continue to insist that not only do Black lives matter, but blue lives matter. Very few departments have been defunded despite the demands of the Black Lives Matter movement. Police unions and police officers resist or defy or resign when efforts are made to restructure departments. Racial inequality before the pandemic made things worse, much worse, especially for Black people and people of color, in jobs and income, in housing and health, and people in prisons have suffered in particular. If you look at Black politics today, you'll see that out of 100 senators in the United States, there are only 3 Black senators, 2 Democrats, and 1 Republican. There isn't a single Black governor out of 50 governors. And I've been able to identify 59 Black representatives in the House of Representatives out of 435. Many cities in the United States have Black mayors, including some big cities. And there are hundreds of local Black politicians. This looks like a large number, but actually it's a tiny percentage of all politicians in the nation. Another big issue in the news is Confederate monuments. Here you see some examples of Confederate monuments that are being removed. Jefferson Davis in Virginia and Kentucky, John Calhoun in South Carolina. There was a plaque in honor of Confederate soldiers in Jacksonville, Florida, and other statues have been removed as well. More than 100 statues have been removed, and other statues are planned to be removed. While Confederate statues are coming down, Black statues and statues to Black liberation are going up. I give you just one example, the Emancipation statue, which is in Richmond, Virginia, which was put up this year, and which is just one of a great number of statues, a significant but not massive number of statues that have been gone up in opposition to Confederate propaganda. However, the vast majority of Confederate statues still remain in place. And this is a matter of resources. The people who support Confederate statues have far more resources than the people who are against Confederate statues. And there are a lot of people against them, Blacks, other people of color, and also white people. And here you see examples of states in which there's been very little effort, not a single statue removed in West Virginia, only 1% in Mississippi. So this is a long, hard struggle that will continue into the foreseeable future. Not so well known are what I call plantation mansions, plantation heritage sites. There are hundreds of plantations around the country, particularly in the south of the United States, which have now become museums. And all of these houses, these big mansions, are actually the original mansions from the so-called slave plantations. Here you see Nottoway in Louisiana, Monticello in Virginia, Boone Hall in South Carolina, and Oak Alley in Louisiana. These plantation heritage sites have a much bigger impact than Confederate museums and monuments. Why? Because millions of people visit them every year. By the way, I took these photographs. I've been to more than 120, actually more than 150 of these plantations around the country. And millions of visitors go there and hear a very whitewashed and sanitized history of slavery, in which most of what they hear is about elite white people. And they hear very little or nothing or distorted images and information about Black people. So these plantation heritage sites remain a major infrastructure of Confederate propaganda and Southern propaganda. At many of these sites, there are slave cabins, the places that were built to put Black people in. Many of these slave cabins used to be hidden, but because Black people and others have mobilized, many of these cabins are now out in the open, and they are used to challenge the domination of Confederate and Southern whitewashed histories. Here you have some in Florida, in Louisiana, in South Carolina. And again, I visited these sites and I took these photographs. So there is a challenge that continues. That challenge is uneven, extreme, and contradictory. Okay. In addition to the plantation heritage sites, there are hundreds of African-American museums. And whereas most of the plantation sites begin their story of Black people in slavery, Black sites, African-American sites, overwhelmingly begin their story in Africa and the origins of human civilization. Here you see some examples of some of these museums. This woman, Ellen Craft, escaped from slavery in Georgia, actually visited Liverpool in the late 1800s and organized abolition efforts. You see there an image of a black man with a gun. You will never see an image of a black man with a gun in mainstream plantation heritage sites. They wouldn't show that. You will only see that in the counter-hegemonic sites organized by black people. Okay. Critical race theory is big in the media right now. You'll see that at least 8 states have made it illegal to teach critical race theory. Okay. And I saw a comment somewhere, I forget what the origin was, but it said basically the people who are against critical race theory, who are against any discussion of slavery and the history of institutional racism in the US, those people who forced black people to sit at the back of the bus in the 1950s don't want their children or grandchildren. They don't want the world today to know that that's what they did. Direct, malicious, institutional racism. And I point out there that this also is happening in Britain, and the people here today know far more about that than me. The Conservative Member of Parliament, Kemi Badenoch, says publicly, this government is against critical race theory, and that anyone teaching white privilege without a balanced view could be prosecuted. These are scare tactics by various governments who have relative power, who have major power. And I want to point out that in response to some of this, people have refused. And some white students in particular have increased the numbers they want to hear about critical race theory. And when I did my master's degree in England in the 1980s, we engaged in critical race theory. We didn't call it that. So this has been going on a long time, and we don't need to listen to their uninformed and misrepresentations. Black studies in colleges and universities in the United States are at the forefront of teaching about Black life, Black culture, Black history, about the roles of Black women and men in the past and in the present. And these colleges teach various forms of critical race theory. These colleges are an antidote to the attack on critical race theory. Right now in the United States, there are hundreds of departments at colleges and universities that offer a bachelor's degree in Black studies. There are at least 20 departments around the country that have master's degrees, and probably a lot more. And I've been able to identify at least 12 universities that offer a PhD in Black studies. Although it's curious that none of these colleges in the south of the US offer a PhD at this time, though I know there are a number of Black women professors in Atlanta and New Orleans who are working on that. This looks like a lot because there are no colleges or departments that offer Black studies as a department in the whole of Europe. There is one course, a Black studies degree at Birmingham City University, but nothing else. Okay. It may look like a lot to people in England, but remember or be aware, there are over 3,500 colleges and universities in the United States. So this is not a majority. Okay. Black studies in my departments, at my campus, at my university, right now we have more Black professors than we've ever had, 55, I think. My understanding is that there's only 155 Black professors or lecturers in the whole of the UK. The numbers vary. In my department, there are 13 professors, and all of us except one is Black, and 7 of the professors are Black women. There are 23 students currently doing a PhD in diaspora studies. It all looks very good, and yet the campus has over 1,600 professors. So there's only 55. And people are typically shocked when I tell them that. In 1984, when I arrived in Berkeley to do my PhD, there were 1,600 Black students registered for courses. Right now, there's almost 900. The numbers have gone down very significantly, and we can see that in our classes. Why have the numbers gone down? A variety of reasons, but mainly because affirmative action was abolished by the University of California in the 1990s. What's new in African American studies? You'll see there's books on Afrofuturism, on Black geographies, There's books on the digital Black Atlantic, on Afro-pessimism. There are books on various kinds of cyber and virtual space. And there's also more and more work, books, research, and writing on queers and transgenders. Okay. The reason that things in the United States are uneven, extreme, and contradictory is that the country is immense, massive, gigantic, and large. There's more than 330 million people in the USA right now, including 48 million people who identify as Latino. Amongst that 330 million people, there are 47 million immigrants. I'm one of them. And the largest number of immigrants in the US is in California. I think New York is second. The number of Black Americans is between 42 and 44 million, depending on whom you ask. And Black immigrants are calculated to be around 4 million, plus another 6 to 8 million US-born children of Black immigrants, African, Caribbean, Latin American, and others like me from Black Europe. Caribbeans are overwhelmingly concentrated or in larger numbers in Florida, in New York, in Washington, DC, in Boston, and in Chicago. There are Africans in larger numbers in Texas, New York, California, and Maryland. So spread out across the nation. One of the largest growing groups, and a group that only has a tiny presence in Britain, is Afro-Latinos. These are Black people who are original Spanish speakers and come from nations like the Dominican Republic, like Puerto Rico and Cuba, nations in which Spanish is the national language. Okay. Sometimes Afro-Latinos include Haitians and Brazilians, although those populations don't speak Spanish. So there's negotiation around these identities. And 65% of Afro-Latinos live on the East Coast or in the US South, particularly in Florida. So this is some of the diversity of the Black population. Professor Eduardo Bonilla Silva has published multiple books on racism in the United States. He has one book called Racism Without Racists. And he argues that the old binary, the old distinction that was simply between Black and white is no longer viable. And he says what's happening right now is the Latin Americanization of the United States. And that no longer will the divide be between mainly Blacks and whites. The divide will be between white, brown, and Black, intersected with the Spanish language. Not only is there diversity of language, there's also, excuse me, there's also diversity of politics. There are a significant number of Black people who are conservative and vote Republican. They support the former president, you know who, I don't like to say his name, and they are in favor of individualism, patriotism, Christianity. They are overwhelmingly anti-abortion. They believe in color blindness, and they support capitalism and the American dream. 3.9 million Black people currently identify as Republican. Black wealth and white wealth is a major area in which there are fundamental inequalities, and in which, again, we see that issues in the United States are uneven, extreme, and contradictory. Right now in the United States, I've been able to identify 8 Black billionaires. That's people with $1,000 million. There are several hundred Black people who are worth millions or tens of millions. There's a few Black people who are worth hundreds of millions, 500, 600, 700 million. Overwhelmingly, these Black people got their money in music, in television, in dance, in sports, and some of them in business. There are 8 Black billionaires right now out of a number of 500 billionaires in the US recorded 2 years ago, and almost 3,000 millionaires. The vast majority of them are white. And just to give you an idea, here's the images I collected recently. You'll see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these people, the bottom 6 here, got their money in television, in sport, in music, in hip hop. 4 of these people only became billionaires in the last year. The top 2, David Stewart and Robert Smith, they are in banking and business. How do the Black wealthy compare to the white wealthy? The short answer is not very well. Rich white people are far richer than rich black people, far, far richer. And there are far more rich white people than there are rich black people in the United States. And even though there are 8 billionaires, not a single billionaire has enough money to be on the list of the top 100 billionaires in the United States. Jeff Bezos is currently estimated to have 202 billion, Bill Gates 131, Mark Zuckerberg 120. Oprah Winfrey currently has around 2.4 billion. I think Robert Smith and David Stewart have slightly more. So there are dramatic differences between rich blacks and rich whites. However, all rich people have become far richer since 2008, whether they're black or white. At the opposite end of the extreme is the tragedy of black inequality and black poverty. Over 30% of black people in the United States, more than 14 million people, are in poverty. Black people are in deeper poverty than white people. Black people are in poverty for far longer. They have higher rates of unemployment, lower rates of medical insurance and health coverage. And it will come as no surprise to those who look closely at these issues that black women and children face even more obstacles and are in even deeper poverty than are men. And there exists what I call a paradox of images of racial inequality. In absolute numbers, there are more white people in poverty than there are black people in poverty. And it's estimated by December of this year, there'll be around 7% of whites in poverty, about 17 million people, and 30% of black people in poverty, which, as I mentioned, is around 14 million. And the reason there are more whites in poverty is simply because there are more whites in the country. 76% or so of people in the country are white. And again, whether white or black, women are overrepresented in poverty, and black women face more obstacles than white women at a general level. One of the biggest, most contentious areas right now is the incarceration of black men and increasingly of black women. I would call it the single biggest problem confronting black people alongside the pandemic. The US prison population is massive and unparalleled in US history. The US has the highest rate of incarceration in the entire world. And although the US has 5% of the world's population, it has 25% of all the prisoners in the world. The majority of prisoners in the US are Black and Latino men, and I'll give you some numbers in a moment. The American penal system is a system of social control unparalleled in world history. And Michelle Alexander, who wrote the book, The New Jim Crow, says prisons were designed specifically with racist intention to discriminate against Black people without mentioning the word race. I recently looked up the numbers of prisons. Here you see over 6,800 prisons in the United States. In addition, there are military prisons, immigration detention facilities, civil commitment centers, state psychiatric hospitals, and prisons in US territories. This is a massive prison industrial complex worth billions and billions of dollars that employs tens of thousands of people. Right now, there are at least 2.3 million people in prison in the United States. About 90% of them are men and 10% of women. And there's a far higher proportion of Black people who are in prison, around 800,000, I think a bit higher than that. And that means that 1 out of every 29 Black men in the country is in prison or has recently been in prison. And that's at the national level. If you look at cities like Chicago, New York, Oakland, and in particular Baltimore, there's a far higher proportion of men in prison, Black men. And this has devastating effects on their lives and also on the lives of their families. The numbers of Black women in prison has gone up. There's estimated to be 70,000 Black women currently in prison. And the prison population has increased dramatically since 1980. Before 1980, by the way, the majority of people in prison were white, and now the vast majority are Black and people of color. And it is a fact that white people in the US consume more drugs than Black people, but Black people are arrested and imprisoned far more because of racist policing policies. California shares a number of things in common with the United States, but it also has a number of differences. The California population right now is estimated at 39 million. It will be 40 million very soon, okay? And California is bigger geographically than the whole of England. It may not be bigger than Great Britain, but certainly bigger than the whole of England, okay? Black people in California are around 7%, and Black people in the US are around 13%. So that means the Black population in California is half of the national average. It may not look like that when you're looking at California. That's because the majority of Blacks in California are in Los Angeles, where you see Hollywood, where you see TV, where you see films, and where you see music. So it looks like there's a lot more people there. Right now in California, there are twice as many Asian Americans as there are Black people, 14% compared to 7%. And Latinos outnumber all other groups, 38%. It's actually slightly bigger than that. And in California right now, there is a plurality of ethnicities or races, and more people of color collectively than there are white people. California has a particular reputation and is particularly prominent because of its history of very prominent and effective activities, organizations, and individuals for what I call Black self-determination. The Black Panther Party, there you see Eldridge Cleaver. No, that's Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton, who began the Black Panther Party here in Oakland in 1966. There you see Tommy Smith and John Carlos. They were both students at San Jose State University, which is about 50 miles away from me. And they did that famous, or I was going to say infamous, depending on who you ask. It was famous to me. In 1968, you see to the right, the statue is a statue at San Jose State University right now. You see Tommy Smith there. He's still alive. He's still active. He's still giving public lectures. He has a house, I believe, in Vegas and one in Atlanta. And there you see Black women in the Black Panther Party. It's not as well known that Black women were actually the majority in the Black Panther Party, but they were not the majority in leadership. Angela Davis was born in Alabama. She moved to California. She became a professor at the University of California, LA. The government had spies in the audiences. She's had a major impact on Black people around the planet. And she's still going. I think she must be in her high 70s. And the second time that I met Angela Davis was at an event in the late 90s, when she launched the Prison Industrial Complex Critical Resistance Campaign. I've met her on several other occasions. I see she's about to give a lecture at Berkeley in a few weeks. She still lives here in Oakland. Okay. Another key part of California, although the Black population is relatively smaller, Black studies programs began first and expanded the most in California. The first Black studies program in the United States was in San Francisco State, 1968 to 69. The second one, I believe, although there's some dispute, was at UCLA. The Berkeley program began as part of ethnic studies in 1970. And then African-American studies went independent of ethnic studies in 1974. They changed their name, or we changed our name to African Diaspora Studies. I was here in 97, and the PhD began in 1997. But although California is at the lead, there are also contradictions, extremes, and things are uneven. Because the University of California abolished affirmative action in the mid-1990s. The university abolished it first, and then the popular vote later abolished it for the state as a whole. Despite that, California, in May 2021, the governor of California established the first task force at a state level to study reparations for African Americans. And that task force is currently underway and currently meeting. It has about 15 or 20 members, and one of the members of the California Reparations Task Force is my colleague, Professor Jovan Lewis. He is the chair of the Department of Geography here at Berkeley, and he's also a faculty affiliate in the institute that I direct. You may suspect he's Jamaican, and you would be right. He is in fact Jamaican or Jamaican American or Jamaican. Okay. Black Lives Matter continues, expands, is insistent on challenging racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia. These three women, who are regarded as the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, I think regarded, they actually are still working to challenge inequality, to challenge injustice, and to challenge the limitations of formal politics. Black Lives Matter has chapters and branches across the country. It also has chapters and branches across the world. These three women continue to work on these issues. Actually, I've got some notes. Alicia Garza continues to live in Oakland and works in a variety of local and national activities. Patrice Cullors lives in LA. She's a professor and community organizer. And Opal Tometi lives in Brooklyn and is also a community organizer and activist. And you probably didn't know that Opal Tometi is the child was born in the US and has two Nigerian parents. Black Lives Matter works across the country, continues to advocate radical progressive policies and practices, continues to work with a range of organizations, and continues to be insistent and demanding. They are far more explicit and far more direct on a wide range of intersectional issues, particularly around gender, queers, transgender, domestic violence, and homophobia, including in the civil rights movement, the so-called traditional civil rights activists. They are confronting economic subordination, political marginalization, and the dehumanization, stress, and mental health that policing, prisons, inequality, and the pandemic continue to inflict upon Black populations, Black people in general, and Black women in particular. Black women, as far as I can see, have always been the majority in the majority of Black organizations. There are a small number that don't let Black women in or are far more obstructive to Black women's participation. And so they've always been a majority historically in the civil rights movement, in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, in the Nation of Islam, I'm not so sure, I'd have to look, in the Black arts movement, and certainly in Black Lives Matter movement. Okay, they're not always in the leadership positions, but they've always, to me, seemed to be the majority. Black women right now continue to work in academia, in law, in tech. This image of about 10 Black women, these are mainly women in tech or politics. So in a wide range of areas, punching above their weight, if I can use that metaphor. So small in number, but powerful. Here you see two of the longest standing and most progressive formal politicians, Maxine Waters, who's been in politics since 1981, is still very active, is aged 84 years old, and recently challenged the Biden, she was scathing towards the Biden administration because of what they'd done to Haitian immigrants at the border in Mexico. She's a politician in LA. Barbara Lee is the local congresswoman in Oakland, California. She's 75 years old. She's been in politics at least since the 1990s. And she is the only person in Congress that voted against the Iraq war. Yeah, the only person in Congress. And she stood by her principles and has a very tremendous following. Oh, and of course, Angela Davis, who I've mentioned, who is still active, still campaigning, still traveling around the world to challenge not only racism, but sexism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, and transphobia. And there are many videos that you can see of her. And as I said, she's about to speak on my campus in the next couple of weeks. She has tremendous energy. Okay. The United States is massive, enormous, gigantic, and large. The rich are richer and the poor are poorer than in most other nations, especially in the Western Hemisphere. There are more guns in the United States than there are in any other country on the planet, And there are more gun crimes as well. There are more homicides and murders in one city in the United States than there are in the whole of Great Britain. Unfortunately, there's more violence against women in general and against Black and other women of color in particular. As I said, there are more prisons, more jails, and more detention centers that lock up Black people and other people of color. And yet this nation is uneven, extreme, and contradictory. There are Black billionaires, hundreds of Black people with tens of millions, and thousands of Black people who have $1 million or more in income and wealth. Black celebrities, musicians, artists, and sportsmen and women are the idols and the heroes of Black and non-Black people in the United States and around the world. And growing up, I used to say, and I suspect that this is still the case, that Black Americans are the coolest Black people on the planet. Everybody around the world knows more about Black Americans than they do about Black people in any other country. And yes, the United States had a Black president, and then it was followed by you-know-who. Uneven, extreme, and contradictory. Black people in Britain and Black people in Liverpool, past and present, including myself, owe a great debt to Black Americans. And we should continue to take inspiration, motivation, and encouragement from the Black experience in the United States. And most of it will be to our benefit. But I hope I've made clear in today's presentation that Black America is not an unequivocal success story, and we should not see it as an unequivocal success story. But despite the persistence of race and racism, despite the fact that the racists have more resources, Black people remain resistant, resilient, and determined. And as Maya Angelou points out, Black people will continue to rise. Thank you. And I finished there.
Thank you, Stephen. That was great. Yeah, it's a lot to take in. Yeah, I just wanted to start off the Q&A really sort of going back to the beginning of your lecture, I suppose.
Sure.
And
excuse me, Janaya, can I
Yeah.
just ask you a question? Can you still see the slides, or shall I get rid of them?
I can't see the slides now.
Okay, so that's okay. We don't need them. We
They've
don't
gone
need them.
off.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead with your question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so just basically, I just wanted to know from a personal point of view a bit more about yourself. You mentioned that your mum and dad had a barber shop in Upper Hill Street. What's your sort of family history in Liverpool, or what's your heritage? And
Okay,
how
well,
did you come to decide to take that leap?
okay, well, that's easy. I think, so my dad was from Jamaica. He was working class. He left school, I'm sure, when he was about 12 or 14. He was a barber. He came to England in 1947. He looked around England, Manchester, Birmingham, and he decided there were so few, actually there were no Black barbers in Liverpool. So he returned to Liverpool and set up a barbershop. First, because most Black people were in Chinatown. At that time, he had a barbershop in Chinatown. And then in 1954, I think 54, he moved to Upper Hill Street. My mother was white and English, not Irish as far as I know, but you never know. Okay. Mm-hmm. And when she met my dad, her family threw her out. Her own family refused to see her, refused to talk to her. We had no contact with her family whatsoever. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I grew up in that family. I have 3 brothers and I had 2 sisters. One of them passed away, unfortunately. One of them migrated to Canada. I'm very confident now, but when I was a kid, I was very deferential and very obedient. And my parents told me, you have to stay in school, you have to study. And I didn't want to do it. It's only because of them. All of my friends who were mainly in Paddington, Paddycombe, they all left when they were 15. And I was like, why do I have to stay in this school? And now every day I fall to my knees and I thank them for forcing me to stay at school. Okay. So that was my experience. When I was 7 years old, my mum and dad moved us to Amthill Road on Egbert Road, just before the Vale. We thought we were in Egbert. by the cricket ground, but it looked nothing like that. However, we were the only black people on the street. And white people were either indifferent or there was a lot of racist language. Some of the kids used to write nigger lover on our doorstep. My poor mom had to go through that kind of verbal abuse. And somebody asked me, well, the other thing that happened is I met Neil Innes when I was 12. We both had a paper round in Lark Lane in the old days. Okay. And he brought me to the Rodney, to the Unity, to the Blackie, and so on and so forth. So I lived this life between these two areas. And people ask me, did you feel more comfortable in the white area or in Liverpool 8? I said, comfort has nothing to do with it. White people never made me feel comfortable whatsoever. It was nigger this, it was Sambo, it was big lips, it was go back to Africa, go eat a missionary in a pot. The schools were white. I got verbal abuse when I was on the bus, except when I was 14, my brother Terry brought me to a boxing club in St. Ambrose. And the boxing coaches there, 3 white guys, one was called Pete Doherty. And they were fantastic. They wouldn't tolerate a word of racial abuse. They wouldn't tolerate a word of hostility. And that's where I really felt welcome. Okay. So my parents kept me in school, and the boxing club at 14, I was very determined. I don't know where I got it from. I was very determined as a kid. I'd go running 3 days a week. I'd go to the boxing gym 3 nights a week. I'd be in school doing O-levels and A-levels. I had a paper round, and then I'd go to the top rank. And I asked myself, how were you able to do this? And you know what the answer is? I've got a clear answer. Number 1, I was determined. Number 2, I didn't drink beer. I didn't go to the pub. I didn't drink beer. I didn't follow football. I've been to 3 football matches in my entire life. Okay. And I didn't follow cricket. So I had all this time and it kept me out of trouble. So is that kind of, there is one other issue, just to keep it clear, is that when my dad went to England, the brother and sister went to London. So I have about 6 or 7 cousins. So I used to go to London a lot. And when I came to the US, it turned out that I have 3 uncles in the US. 2 of them are still alive. They lived in New York and Chicago. They're now retired in Florida. So, and I had about 7 or 8 cousins who I'm still in touch with. So this family network was very, very important, for support and so forth.
I think that's the case for a lot of Black Liverpool families. A lot of us have families sort of posted around in London. And as you say, you've mentioned before as well, Canada, the United States, there seems to be at some point in Liverpool's Black history, a bit where people have sort of branched off and gone to different places. So basically it was just about what made you decide to leave? Why did you leave Liverpool? Why didn't you stay here?
Oh, well, you know what? In simple terms, it's what I would call push and pull factors. So I was pulled out to Liverpool to go to university. And I was having such a great time in Liverpool, going to nightclubs, going to the Ebo, going to the Sierra Leone, going to the Methodist. I said, if I don't leave Liverpool, if I go to university here, I'm never going to finish. I'll never be able to study. So that was a kind of push me out. I said, if I'm going to be serious, I need to go, and I need to go far. I said, if I go to Manchester, I'll be back every weekend, So that's push and pull. Then the other thing is, just more opportunities in London, because I have these cousins, because I've talked to people. When you go to university, you meet people. So I remember the end of the first year in university, other students, mainly white, they said to me, where are you going for summer? And I said, what kind of stupid question is that? I'm going to Liverpool. Where are you going? Well, I'm going to Paris to study this, and I'm going to Italy to study that, and I'm going to New York, and I'm going to Rio. And I was like, I fancy some of this myself.
Why not?
Then I met a lot of, in Liverpool, because there's Black people from a lot of places, I used to speak to a lot of Nigerians who were students. I also worked in hotels. I worked in the Atlantic Tower Hotel with Neil Innes and Sandra St. Rose and other people. And there were Nigerians, they're all studying. So they tell me these stories about where they came from and what they were doing. And then you get to London, you get to university, you meet more people from around the world. So, when I was growing up, my friends used to say to me, Stephen, you're not one to let the grass grow under your feet. I always had itchy feet. I had to get going. The other thing is, Stanley House used to have these coach trips every summer. It was Herbie Higgins, Mr. Joey Joel, and others, the Jamaican Association. And they'd take us to Leeds and Manchester and London and so forth. And so it got me around looking at other things. Jimmy Rogers was very encouraging, brought me to some youth conferences. So there were all these, opportunities. And then the final thing I think is in 1979, my sister migrated to Canada. My sister, who's 10 years older than me, got married when she was 16 and had 5 kids. And she decided there's no future for her Black kids in England. And she went to Canada and she told me, Stephen, you should come. You should come. You've been at university. You'll be awesome. And I went to Canada first. I went and had a look. And I thought it's okay, but I'm going to explore around. So I think they were the various things. And also, you know what? In the language of the day, it's not language I use right now, but at that time, my language was, I'm sick and tired of these white racists in England. I've got to get out. Now, people said, look, you went to the United States. It's not particularly better there. I said, hey, I'll take my chances.
Yeah. And I suppose it's partly what you're saying there about how people in Liverpool, or Black people in the UK in general, have always looked to Black America, as being sort of the inspiration for liberation and whatnot. But I've got a question anyway from Io Barley. Mm-hmm. He says, what are your views on Take the Knee in the UK, which is intended to make a peaceful stance for anti-racism? What connections exist between this response and the response to Black Lives Matter in the US? And how far do peaceful stances such as these make a difference, in your opinion, compared to more direct action for anti-racism? Should we be taking a different approach based on the history of anti-racism?
Okay, it's a good question.
Yeah.
Here's what I say. First of all, when you said Black people look abroad, I asked a friend of mine, a Black woman in London, and I said, when Black people in England look abroad for Black people, do 90% of them still look at the USA? She said, no. 99% of our time is spent looking at the USA. So this, as you said, has always been our inspiration. Okay, taking the knee. Listen, here's my approach. I think taking the knee and related activities that are symbolic and visible in the public sphere are absolutely necessary to keep the debate alive around institutional racism. People in Britain in general, non-Blacks, and the racists in particular, they don't want to talk about racism because the evidence is overwhelming of institutional racism in the entire history of the British Empire. So they'd rather not talk about it. So Black people and people who are not Black, who want fairness for all groups, should engage in all of these activities, taking the knee, anything to keep things in the public sphere. Because while Black people, we do not have the resources, we can make sure that we will never be silent. Okay. Clearly, taking the knee was inspired by what's going on in the United States. The Black Lives Movement in Britain, in France, in Germany, in Italy and Denmark was inspired. But as you know, better for everyone because of Black people. Okay, so we continue to do that. We should continue to do that. But it doesn't mean it's the only thing we should do. I am not a historian. I'm a sociologist and a political economist. But I study a lot of history. And some Black people say to me, why do you waste your time studying history? And I said, I don't think it's a waste of time. But look, you don't have to ignore the present. You can do all of these things. Okay. Yeah. The final thing, so taking the knee is one tactic, and it's been very important. There will be a backlash. There has been a backlash in England as well as the US. I've seen the abuse, including some arrogance, contempt, and condescension from some politicians, mainly conservative, but other too. But, the other thing I'd say is this. Over the last 10 years, actually 15 years, I've been spending more and more time in Europe, speaking with Black organizations and Black people. And I'm saying more and more, the US is absolutely necessary for motivation, for inspiration, for encouragement, for concrete things like businesses and education and books. However, there's something in the US that can't help us at all, and that's to do with European imperialism. Black people in Britain, in Liverpool, we can benefit from inspiration by looking at the US, but we actually have far more in common with Black people in France, with Black people in Germany, with Black people in Spain. Because the US, it is an imperial nation, but it didn't suffer in the ways, it didn't create suffering directly in the ways that British colonialism, British imperialism, French imperialism did after slavery ended. So I'm trying to encourage people, look, you don't have to stop looking at the US, but look also at other nations in Europe. And, you know, we can find benefits there.
And I think as well, I mean, speaking personally, in university, I went to Edge Hill. There wasn't any courses on Black British history, you know, at all. It was this was about 15 years ago now. But at the time, I did specifically go up to the professor and ask, you know, what do you sort of know about Black people in the UK? And he was an English fellow himself. He couldn't answer, you know, he couldn't really give me an answer. He couldn't really point me in a direction, you know, somewhere. So I think, you know, all this debate about the curriculum over here as well, that's something that's been hidden from us, really, is the European Black experience, the UK experience. We're sort of given the American Black experience in school and education before our own. And I think obviously that's, you know, that's been a tactic in itself as well.
Sure, it's deliberate. It's deliberate. And the first thing I'd say is, listen, everybody in Britain has been miseducated, Black people and non-Black people. My understanding is that 40 or 50% of people in England think the British Empire was a good thing. And I don't understand how they could believe that, given the atrocities, the violence, the brutality, the rape, the sexual manipulation. I mean, these were not individual occasional events. This was absolutely part and parcel of the system to exploit Black labor of men and women. So when so many people say, that means they've been miseducated. And I take some inspiration that sometimes when I give lectures in England, white people come to me and they say, look, Stephen, nobody taught us these things. We didn't know these things. We've been duped. We've been brainwashed. So there's part of that process. Some people don't care. That's okay. I don't deal with them. But there are people who care and there are people who want to know. And I think, you know, that's very important. The other thing, which I'm sure you know, is as soon as you mention the word slavery in Britain, before you say another word, somebody says abolition, abolition, abolition. They talk about it forever, like it's going out of fashion. In fact, Eric Williams wrote a book. He wrote this book, Capitalism and Slavery. But in another book, he said, the British love abolition so much that if slavery didn't exist, they would have invented it just so they could abolish it. And they're still talking. And I forget the name of the politician. I saw someone on TV, in British TV, and they said, well, you know, tell me something good that the British did because of slavery. And you know what he said? We abolished it. It's nonsense. I'd love to see one, give us a list. And let me say one other thing, you know, I'm an academic. That's my job. But I've been telling people recently, I was Black a long time before I was an academic. Well, I know a lot about academics. And what I want to say is, it's not just politicians who have miseducated us. It's not just public, but it's also British universities that have spent decades and generations miseducating us. And some of it is outright racist lies, but most of it in Britain is silence, is evasion. They don't talk about the topics. They use code words or euphemisms. They engage in circumspection and prevarication. So I accuse scholars that British scholars have systematically misrepresented the history of the British Empire in ways that border on delusions or hallucinations. This is my new word, hallucinations. They imagine things that simply were not there, or they have one example and they exaggerate it. And it's no longer tolerable. Black people and non-Black people no longer accept it. But again, it comes back to resources.
Yeah.
And you know that Liverpool Black History Research Group has recently compiled a report, systematic, compelling, factual information on the ways in which Liverpool University was both complicit with and involved in benefiting from slavery. The university first denied it, but now they've realized they can't deny it. And I think it's a travesty that Liverpool University, with all its resources, has waited for a group of volunteers in the Black community, maybe this one, and I really encourage Liverpool University to respond, to let us know what they are going to do to acknowledge what's happened. And I think that project is called Enslavement Enabling Education. And so we really need to do that. And I was in a conversation, I've got to say one more thing. I was in a conversation with Hilary Beckles. Yeah, we were on a panel together. And he said, listen, some of these universities are offering professorships. Some of them are offering a few spaces. He said, even if they did that for 100 years, it wouldn't even begin to pay back the ways in which they've exploited Black people in Africa, in the Americas. So my friend Barna Hesse says to me, Stephen, are you here to build or to destroy? I'm always here to build. I'm here to engage in conversations. I'm here to find ways to move ahead. I'm here to find ways to make education more accurate, more comprehensive. But I have to see some genuine effort, some genuine sincerity.
That's interesting what you say about the Liverpool Slavery History Group. It's the same with Writing on the Wall, with the Great Water Race Riots Project. The amount of attention, you know, the 1919 race riots got after that. The project sort of ran in line with the centenary of the Great War, but the amount of attention that got after, you know, again, a volunteer group sort of did the research and, you know, community organisation. Now that's sort of in the Records Office for public use. You know, it was featured on a BBC documentary, but this is, you know, history that has been known within the Black community itself. You know, it's always been known. So it's interesting, as you say. What I want to ask you about, your opinion about, is why these things have become, obviously there was the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movements, but what else do you think has sort of encouraged this re-examination of you know, everything basically, isn't it, from the curriculum, as you were saying, to the statues? There's all that going on here as well. What do you think has encouraged that sort of?
Okay, you know, I'm very clear on that. All of these issues are because Black people have consistently mobilized. We've consistently refused to be quiet. Black women in Liverpool, like the people you know, Maria O'Reilly, Gloria Hyatt, Michelle Charters, and before them, Sandra Antigua and Carly Montoute, and a lot of Black men too. They refused to be quiet. They kept pushing and pushing. Okay. The same for the Atlantic Slave Trade Gallery. It was announced it was just going to be on the slave trade. And a lot of us went down there and we said, this is wrong. Why are you beginning up? We want work on Africa. Angus Chukwemeka and the Merseyside African Council was there. They said, we want to hear about Africa. There were other people who said, why are you talking about slavery in the past? We're still living in slavery. So Black people pushed that. They pushed the International Slavery Museum. And my argument these days is that all of these things are happening because Black people mobilized.
Yeah.
Yes, we were prompted and it was a catalyst. The murder, it's now officially a murder of George Floyd. But we've been doing all these things for a long time, for generations and for centuries. Let me give you another example. In Europe right now, I argue that there are 12 nations have 90% of Black people. 90% of Black people in 12 nations. And those 12 nations have 4,200 nationally elected politicians, 4,200. And of those 4,200, there are about 25 Black people, 25 out of 4,200. And of those 25, about 20 are in England. 20 are in England. So there's 90% of all Black politicians at the national level in Europe are in England. So the question becomes why? And people, when I lecture in Europe, I lecture in the Black Europe Summer School every year in Amsterdam, and we do these comparisons. And people ask me why, and my answer is because Black people mobilized. Black and Asian people too mobilized. Black women mobilized to demand representation, to set up Black vote, to set up Black sections in the Labour Party, so on and so forth. Now, some white people say, yeah, but we helped. And I'm like, look, yeah, I know you helped. It's wonderful. But why do you need credit for doing something that you're supposed to do? We're supposed to compliment people because they're anti-racist. Okay, wonderful. I applaud you. But it's mainly because of Black people.
Yeah.
Why are universities talking about this issue? Because Black women and men went to college like yourself and they said, look, what's going on? Let me give you another example. I began my master's degree in 1981 at Bristol University. And we began in the class. It was a class on the history of Black Britain. And the professor said, we're going to start with 1945. And I said, wait a minute. Why are we starting with 1945? What about, and he, to his credit, he said, you're right. I've made a mistake. It's wrong. And he went away and he came back and gave us some lectures on the history of Black Britain. So again, to make it simple, every single benefit that has happened for Black people has come because Black people mobilized. And those benefits have also helped non-Black people. So George Floyd, tragically, the poor guy is dead. He doesn't know the kind of influence he's had, was a prompt. One other thing, the statues. I did an interview recently, and the guy said to me, when you were a kid in Liverpool, were you worried about statues? I said, you got to be kidding. I was trying to stay alive. I didn't have time to worry about statues. And we knew they were there. Jimmy Jones told us, Mr. Joey Joel told us, Bobby Nile told us. I said, but we didn't have time to look at all those kinds of things. So the statues, when people ask me, I say, look, here's my position, and I'll make it public in case people, I say, look, statues and memorials are not Black people's priority in Liverpool. Black people's priority are schools and education, stopping their children from racist abuse, good health. But statues are useful as a catalyst to point out some of these racists. Listen, the university has just renamed Gladstone Hall after Dorothy Kuya. I'm a member of that committee. I'm a member of the University of Liverpool committee that renamed that building. Okay, but nobody's telling us about that. So the statues are good, but it's just a catalyst. What we're really interested in is substantial changes in our lives and an end to racism, plain and simple.
But I think, as you mentioned before, about looking into history, that's, as you say, it's a catalyst. And I think especially I did the slavery walking tour with Lawrence Westgaff not long ago, and I've been here my whole life, 30 something years, and there's things I didn't know about Liverpool, or statues I didn't know who they were, or what they were about. And I think definitely, as you say, they do serve a purpose now. If we are looking at those things to help people, especially Black people, Liverpool Black people, to understand their history here. And because I think in a sense we've been so closed off and not given those opportunities for education. And speaking personally, I didn't know anything about my Black heritage in Liverpool until I was in my 20s. And as your professor, starting from 1945, that's where I thought my Black British experience or my family's began, was in come over on the Windrush, which was just something I didn't even understand. But so I do think the debate around it, as you say, is a catalyst for some.
Look at Lord Woodbine, Harold Phillips. We didn't know anything about him. Now everybody's become very interested.
Yeah.
His daughter said to me, it's a shame when my dad was alive, nobody was interested in him. And now he's dead. Okay. Johnny Hazel was a professional boxer. He was on the Empire Windrush. And we didn't know anything about him. I'm starting to find out. I was a boxer, but as a young person, I wasn't interested. So we've been miseducated. It's been misrepresented. And we need to look at that. Now, let me tell you something else. There are a lot of people in England, including your Prime Minister, whose name I don't like to say, and they say we don't want to talk about the past. And I'm like, of course you don't want to talk about the past, because you know what the truth is. These are educated people. He said he doesn't, and yet every day he talks about Churchill. Every day people talk about politicians. Every one of the statues is to a white man who was a politician. So they say we don't want to talk about history, but you celebrate history every single day. People who died in wars. Here's another example. My friend Kwame Nimako, who founded the Black Europe Summer School, people said to him, why are you always talking about history? Why don't you forget history? Why don't you live for the present? You know what he said? Why are you always talking about Jesus Christ? That's history. He was dead 2,000 years ago, but he rules every part of your life. Now, I don't wish to be offensive to Christians, but the idea that history is irrelevant, everything they say about Britain is based on distortions about what they say they achieved in the past. And I know they're distortions because now I'm reading, I spent 30 years studying slavery in the British Empire. I looked at imperialism, but in the last 5 years, I've become interested, preoccupied, almost obsessed with imperialism. So now I'm reading work by Ellen Craft, by Anna Julia Cooper, by Edward Wilmot Blyden, by Henry Sylvester Williams, by Kwame Nkrumah, by Claudia Jones. All of these people, we've never heard their names because they won't tell us. And you know why they won't tell us? Because every one of those people, of those persons, challenged British imperialism. When the British said we're doing it for civilization, Henry Sylvester Williams said it's a lie. We've got the evidence. Blyden said it's a lie. Let me give you one example. The Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine was the first school of tropical medicine in the world. It began in Liverpool in the 1890s. And it was supported directly by Joseph Chamberlain, who was the colonial secretary. And it was financed to a large part by Alfred Lewis Jones. And there's a statue of Alfred Lewis Jones at the pier head that we need to look into. Okay. And that school of tropical medicine, the Brits say it was designed to keep everybody healthy and to save them from malaria. And it's an absolute lie. If it kept Africans healthy, that was an afterthought, an after effect. It was designed to keep white people alive so they could colonize Africa. And the British absolutely supported racial segregation to keep blacks and whites apart in West Africa in order to achieve their goals. So again, it's a misrepresentation that it's a distort. Well, let me get it right. First, they say nothing. They make these claims and then they distort it. Then they exaggerate it. So again, you know, I just hope that, well, not I hope. One of the benefits of the fact that all this information is out now is that younger people will hear about it, you know, instead of waiting till they're 30 or 40, like other people. Oh, if I'd known half of this when I was 15, I'd be very different. And I'm a big success already. But if I'd known this when I was young, so, you know, that's why I see the other thing with history, again, it's a means to an end, is you get inspiration when you hear about the Black women that were fighting and organizing slave rebellions. Nobody ever told us about a slave rebellion. They told us everyone was happy. But when you read about Black American women organizing against slavery, against Jim Crow, when you read about people in Africa, Amilcar Cabral and Kwame Nkrumah, and these other people, you get inspiration and you get motivation. And I think that's good. So, you know, nobody has to do as much history as me. I get paid to study, but do some history. You know, you'll feel better.
I just want to just let me give a little comment from IO. Said, thank you for your answer. So powerful to remind us to find ways to always keep the discussion going any way possible, rather than allowing the silence.
That's right.
And then Teresa Williams has put, Stephen delivers chapter and verse, so your brain is applauding. Thank you.
Sure. You won't be bored. You might become annoyed, but you won't be bored. So, but tell me what history are you reading right now, Janaya? Is there anything you're reading?
Well, I've been mainly helping WOW at the moment with the Black History Month schedule, so I haven't been doing.
You haven't had time, but that, you know, you're learning things.
But I think my interest really is Liverpool's Black community, you know, from a personal point of view, 20th century. At the moment, I'm interested in, since I did the soundscape, the 70s, you know, and the sort of Black liberation movements that popped up, the Defence Committee, the LA Law Centre, again, which is things that did not, that happened not long before I was born, but that I've never really heard of, or, you know, I think they are sort of fundamental subjects within Black Liverpool history that really should, you know, be looked into and documented properly. But yeah, Liverpool Black history is my interest.
Well, you know, I think it's great. You should go with what you're interested in. There's a lot of information. You know, there are books. Have you read any of the books by Ray Costello?
Oh yeah. Of
Okay, so
course.
they're great books. Fantastic information, great analysis, easy to read. Okay.
Yeah.
There are other books. I'll think about some. I know books that are much earlier. I'm very keen to find out more about what Dorothy Kuya did. Dorothy Kuya was very active in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
I think in the 40s, certainly in the 50s. And Ludwig Hesse was her mentor. And I think Dorothy Kuya was a Pan-Africanist, but we don't talk about her as a Pan-Africanist. So I'm interested in that. As you know, while I was doing research and collecting records on the L8 Law Center and so forth. So there's a lot more information there. I think that in all the discussion of music, everyone mentions the African nightclubs, but there's very little detail.
Yeah.
I think we really need to find out far more information about who was in the nightclubs, how were they organized. That exposed us to African music in ways that Black people across England were never exposed to. The kind of music, the kind of song. I'm listening to a lot of Fela Kuti right now. Okay, the kind of music that was played back then. So the final thing I'll say is this is a bit of self-promotion. I just got a contract with the University of Liverpool Press to write a book on Black culture in Liverpool in the 1970s to the 1990s, around 1999. And what I do in that book is I look at the influence of West African culture, West Indian culture, and Afro-American culture. And I look at how that impacted and shaped our lives in Black Liverpool. And I've done about 70 interviews with a lot of Black people that you know in Liverpool who were centrally involved in creating Black culture, by which I mean music, performance, but also knowledge and education that was being developed, African art at Liverpool Black Sisters. So I'm working on that, and I've got documents. There are a lot of documents available. And, I encourage you to continue. I'm certainly happy to share some of the stuff I've got.
Yeah.
And I'd love to know what else is going on.
You mean with Black History Month?
No, on research on the 70s.
Right, yeah. So just from the soundscape, I basically used some interviews with Ray Corliss. He'd done like an interview with Madeline that was a couple of hours long, just talking about the area at the time, what inspired them, how they sort of took inspiration from the Black Panthers, but more with the community initiatives, really that side of things.
That was me.
And I just
was me.
Yeah,
I was there in all of that.
Exactly, and I just find that really really interesting, that shift in generations then towards this new sort of sense of identity. And I think it would be really, beneficial for young kids now to understand that pride side of things.
Let me give you a piece of advice. It's a delicate issue, but it has to be said. When I came to do interviews in Liverpool for this project, I began these interviews in 2009. And a friend of mine said to me, Stephen, go and interview the old people before they die. And I did. And unfortunately, some of them I interviewed. I have a live interview with Herbie Higgins. I have a live interview or two with Dorothy Kuya and with some of the people. I regret I couldn't find Jimmy Rogers. Wally Brown is still alive. That's good. We've got interviews with him. Okay. So, if you find it motivating.
There was, I was just going to say on interviews for the Soundscape, there was an interview with a guy, Joe Johnson, who was born, it was a fabulous interview. He was born in 1896 or maybe even earlier, 1880 in Sierra Leone. And the interview was recorded in the 80s as part of, some sort of heritage project then. And so he was 100 and something by the time that they were doing the interview with him, and so hear his voice and his stories about moving to Liverpool, in the 19-teens and stuff. It's just, I agree completely. I'm all for that, recording people's experiences before we lose them,
Have you seen the book Black Pioneers by Ray Costello?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I've got that.
Good. Well, good luck. I hope it goes well.
Yeah. I think if anybody's got any more questions, we are coming up to the end now.
Well, as we're waiting for that, let me ask you what do you think is going on in Black Liverpool that motivates you or encourage you to think things are getting better? Is there anything?
Well, to think things are getting better, I'm not as confident to say that. I mean, I suppose from the point of view of the situation when my parents were young, say, compared to now, you know, I've had better opportunities in education. And I think, to be honest with you as well, my experience as a light-skinned Black woman is different again than from, you know, say somebody else in the community.
Sure.
But I just think in some ways things have got better since my parents were young, but I wouldn't say, I don't know. I think the difference is the exposure on the issues. I think social media has a lot to do with it, and the fact that we can sort of communicate quicker with different Black communities, you know, from across the world. That has had a big impact on
like this
identity, and then how much pride you feel, and that sort of spurs on action then, I think.
Okay. What about, have you seen the book by Dave Clay, 100 Years of Black Liverpool?
No, I've read it.
Oh,
I've read about it. I
you've
mean,
read
I
it,
saw that he released the book. Yeah.
Yeah, because he at the end, he, you know, he has a kind of a balance sheet of whether things have gotten better, and I can't remember exactly what the issues are, but he says some things have gotten better, but some things have gotten worse.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Oh yeah, Teresa Williamson says fab book.
Yeah, Dave Clay. Yeah, that's great.
She's read it. Yeah, I had read that he'd written it. So I don't know whether we want to hand back to Madeline now. Yeah, to close. But thanks for that. It was a great eye opener. Yeah, and you've inspired me to keep researching.
All right. Well, good.
Okay.
Well, you know, keep going. And, you know, let me know how it goes, and I'll be happy to share some stuff with you.
I will do. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for organizing the interview.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you. That was I really loved that conversation. It was fabulous. You two should get your own TV show. I can just see you sitting on a couch chatting away for hours. Really lovely discussion and informative. And Stephen, I loved the presentation was spot on. I think it's fair to say you're one of the most accessible academics I've ever met. You really do break it down without trying to boggle anybody's mind. So absolutely fantastic. Well done. Okay, so I'll just tell you what we've got coming up next for Black History Month. Tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock, again on Zoom, we have Joanne Anderson, our elected mayor, and she is in an event called Be What You Can't See. And this is aimed at young people, students, particularly from Black and racial minority communities, but actually everybody's welcome. So if you know any young people, give them a shout. But if you feel to attend yourself and you're not so young, you are very, very welcome also. On Sunday, we have a commemoration. I mentioned before the 1981 uprisings. We're still in the 40th anniversary. And on Sunday, we're inviting people from other inner city areas that experienced uprisings in 81. We've got artists and commentators and activists coming from London, Bristol, Manchester, and of course, Liverpool, where we've got our own Jimmy Jagney coming along to that. There's going to be, as well as discussion and debate, there's going to be poetry, there's going to be drumming, there's going to be sandwiches, and there's even going to be stuff for the kids to do. So don't feel like, you know, if you haven't got childcare, you can't come. Everybody is very, very welcome to that. All of our events, the residencies that I talked about earlier, all of the details for those are on our website, which is www.writingonthewall.org.uk. If you know anyone who couldn't make this evening's event with Stephen and they were disappointed, I know a few people, please let people know that this event tomorrow will be up on Writing on the Walls Facebook page, and it will be freely available for anyone who's liked or will like our page. And finally, to those of you who've joined us in the Zoom room, to our staff as well who've teched the event and working away in the background, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Good night.